Well, these are all narrative documentaries for the most part. These tell the story of, correct? They're biographies or histories. And from the sound of what you were saying, a lot of it means archival work, right? You have to go back and get, if it's 20th century, try to find old film, or 19th century, you got to go back and use images and pictures and drawings and that sort of thing to put your stories together. No, there's no. The work is pretty straightforward. The problem for documentary, of course, is interpretation. You have, to make a documentary, I don't know what your shooting ratio is, but it's often 100 to 1, 100 hours of material for every one you actually use, something like that. And so, so out of hundreds of hours of material, you have to choose just this or that, and recognize that this is an interpretation and not mistake it for fact. The most important recognition that it seems to me a documentary filmmaker has to realize is that facts are not the truth. Just because something happened in history does not make it true. Fact is what happened. Truth is how and why what happened happened. And that you have to examine that material and look deeply into it and abstract from it the truth of the hows and whys, knowing that some other documentary filmmaker might come along and take the life of the same person you've done and give it an absolutely opposite meaning, and you would both be true. The truths that a documentary unearths, it could be gotten through reading. If somebody were interested, they could go back and read up on the history of Nicholas II and Pushkin or whatever, right? But what are the odds on how many people are going to take the pains to read that much history? On the other hand, if you can give it to them in a documentary, it passes on from generation to generation a knowledge of the past, a knowledge of certain personalities and their influence on the world that if they don't get it in a documentary, they're not going to get it because they're not going to take the time to read it. Oh, Exit Through the Gift Shop. Joan Rivers, A Piece of Work. Walking on Fish. I see a couple, 3, 4, 5 documentaries a year. They're often made by my students who send me, their work, and it's great fun to see. And occasionally, of course, it's usually by word of mouth. Somebody will say, "You have to see this," and so I see it. And great, wonderful documentary filmmakers tell fabulous stories. And what's fascinating to me, and especially like something like the documentary done on Joan Rivers, they went into her life, documenting it with no idea where that life would go. And they just rolled the dice. And I asked them, I interviewed the filmmakers, and I said, suppose her career had just gone in the toilet. They said, well, that would be the end. We are all desperate for stories, and so often directors, because they see Stanley Kubrick and Tarkovsky, especially Kubrick, could not write. You understand that? Yeah. Okay, could not write, was incapable of original creativity, could not start with a blank page, create characters in a world, and tell a story. He could not do that. He was a great interpreter of other people's stories. And he was, as a filmmaker, maybe the greatest ever. We cannot build a film culture on master filmmakers like the Kubricks of this world cannibalizing novels. You need mix. You need both. You need stories from the theater, stories from novels, stories from opera, stories from whatever, history. But you need original screenwriters. Whether those writers become writer-directors or become screenwriters who work in collaboration with directors, but you cannot build a thriving film culture on nothing but cannibalizing novels.